On April 17, 1964, Ford dealers across America took roughly 22,000 orders for a single car in one day. In Garland, Texas, 15 customers bid on the same Mustang, and the winner refused to leave. He slept in the car overnight while his check cleared, terrified the dealer would sell it out from under him. Ford had planned to build 100,000 Mustangs a year. America wanted that many every 6 weeks. The factory was never designed for this. This is the story of how Ford rewrote mass production in real time, inside the plant that built a Mustang roughly every 50 seconds. To understand the chaos of April 1964, you have to understand the bet that came before it and the man who made it. It is 1961. Lee Iacocca, the new general manager of Ford Division, is staring at a demographic tidal wave. The baby boomers, the largest generation in American history, are about to reach driving age. Millions of young buyers with money in their pockets and absolutely nothing in a Ford showroom built for them. Detroit is selling their father's cars. Big, heavy, sensible. Iacocca wants a car that is young, sporty, and, this is the critical part, cheap. The target price is under $2,500. There is just one problem with that number. A brand new car platform costs hundreds of millions of dollars to develop. At that price, the math collapses. The project should be impossible. The solution is the most important cheat in the Mustang story, and most people who love this car still do not realize it. Underneath the long hood and the short rear deck, the Mustang is not new at all. It is a Ford Falcon, the compact economy car. The chassis, the suspension fundamentals, the engines, the drivetrain, borrowed almost wholesale from the most ordinary car Ford built. That decision saved a fortune in development money, but it did something even more important for this story. It meant the Mustang could be built on existing tooling by workers who already knew most of the parts. Remember that. It is the only reason the factory survives what is coming. The styling comes from an internal design competition. Joe Oros's studio wins it with a shape that looks like it is doing 100 miles per hour standing still. Long hood, short deck, a galloping horse in the grille. The car is ready. The price lands at $2,368 for the base model. Now Ford has to guess how many people will want one. The official projection, around 100,000 cars in the first year. Some optimists inside the company whisper about 200,000. Both numbers are about to become a joke. The Mustang's home is the Dearborn Assembly Plant, a building inside Ford's gigantic River Rouge complex in Michigan, where steel, glass, and engines flow in from the surrounding works like tributaries feeding a river. Walk the line in early 1964, and here is what you see. It starts in the body shop, where stamped panels arrive from the Rouge's own presses, fenders, quarter panels, that long signature hood. Welders fix them to the platform structure in a storm of sparks. There are no robots here. Every weld is placed by a human being who does the same precise motion hundreds of times a shift. From there, bodies travel to paint, Rangoon red, Wimbledon white, Caspian blue, then descend to the final assembly line, where the body meets its Falcon-derived heart. The base car carries a 170 cubic inch six-cylinder. The one everybody actually wants is the 260, and soon the legendary 289 cubic inch V8. And here is the number that defines everything. The line is timed so that a finished Mustang rolls off roughly every 50 seconds, 50 seconds per station. A worker has less than a minute to install a dashboard harness, or drop a fuel tank, or bolt a bumper before the next body arrives. Miss your window, and the entire river backs up behind you. At the planned volume, 100,000 cars a year. Dearborn can handle this comfortably alongside its other work. The plant is balanced. The suppliers are scheduled. The workforce is sized. Then comes April 17th. Ford does not launch the Mustang quietly. They launch it like a moonshot. The car debuts at the New York World's Fair on April 17th, 1964. The same week, the Mustang appears on the covers of both Time and Newsweek simultaneously, a publicity coup no car had ever pulled off. Ford buys the 9 o'clock hour across all 3 television networks. An estimated 29 million households see the Mustang the night before it goes on sale. The next morning, America breaks down the doors. A Chicago dealer has to lock his showroom because the crowd is crushing toward the cars. In Pittsburgh, a dealer hoists a Mustang on the wash rack, and the crowd around it grows so thick he cannot bring it back down for hours. In Seattle, a truck driver staring at a Mustang in a dealer window drives straight into the building. And in Garland, Texas, the story from our opening, 15 buyers bid on one car, and the winner sleeps in it overnight, so nobody else can have it. 22,000 orders on day one. By the end of the first weekend, dealers are reporting they could sell every Mustang Ford could build for a year. Except Ford cannot build them anywhere near fast enough. Inside Dearborn Assembly, the pressure arrives immediately. The plant goes to maximum line speed, then overtime, then weekend shifts. Workers describe the spring of 1964 as a blur. 6-day weeks, the line never silent. Supervisors walking the floor, begging for every extra unit. The Falcon parts gamble pays off here. Because the Mustang shares so much with existing Fords, suppliers can surge production of familiar components instead of learning new ones from scratch. But the math still does not work. One plant cannot feed this, so Ford does something drastic. In September 1964, barely 5 months after launch, the San Jose plant in California is converted to Mustang production. 5 months after that, in February 1965, the Metuchen plant in New Jersey joins. 3 factories, coast to coast, building one car as fast as humanly possible. Even that barely keeps up. Dealers run sales contests where the prize is not money. It is Mustang allocation. Customers wait weeks for delivery and consider themselves lucky. Now slow down and look at what this pace actually meant for the people building the car. Because the 1965 Mustang you see at a show today carries their fingerprints in ways collectors obsess over. At 50-odd seconds per station with 3 plants running hot, consistency becomes a daily war. 2 Mustangs built the same week can differ in dozens of small ways. Chalk marks, paint daubs, slightly different supplier parts, depending on which plant built them, which shift, and what was in the parts bins that morning. This is why Mustang restorers today speak in riddles about Dearborn cars versus San Jose cars, and why Concours judges argue over inspection stampings the way scholars argue over manuscripts. The chaos of 1964 is permanently recorded in the metal. The option system multiplies the madness. Iacocca's genius was selling a cheap base car and letting buyers personalize it. V8 engines, consoles, air conditioning, the GT package, interior upgrades. Brilliant for profit, brutal for the line. Every car coming down the conveyor is a different combination announced by a build sheet, and a worker has seconds to read it, grab the right parts, and execute. And the volume keeps climbing. The Mustang is named Pace Car for the 1964 Indianapolis 500. More fuel on the fire. By the car's first anniversary in April 1965, Ford has built roughly 418,000 Mustangs, more than 4 times the original projection, and a record for a first-year nameplate. Then comes the milestone nobody believed possible. In March 1966, less than 2 years after launch, the 1 millionth Mustang rolls off the line. 1 million cars, faster than any new model in history. To put that in perspective, the Mustang reached 1 million units quicker than the legendary Model A had managed decades earlier, in an era with far more competition fighting for every sale. The car that was supposed to be a modest 100,000 a year niche product had become by itself one of the best-selling vehicles in America, and the most profitable gamble of Lee Iacocca's career. The Falcon underneath it, the car that made it all possible, was now being outsold by its own disguise. So what is the final scoreboard for the factory war of 1964? 3 plants, around the clock. Production, roughly 418,000 cars in year 1, 1 million in under 2 years. Numbers that forced every rival in Detroit to respond. General Motors rushed the Camaro into existence. Plymouth re-aimed the Barracuda, an entire species of automobile. The pony car, literally named after the Mustang, was born because Dearborn proved the demand existed and proved a factory could feed it. Lee Iacocca rode the Mustang to the presidency of Ford. The Dearborn Assembly Plant kept building Mustangs for an astonishing 40 years, until 2004. Generations of workers, same ground, same nameplate, and those first-year cars, The ones bolted together in 50-second intervals by exhausted crews on double overtime are now blue-chip collectibles, their tiny plant-to-plant inconsistencies studied like fingerprints. But maybe the best measure of 1964 is this. It was the last time anyone in Detroit dared to publicly underestimate a youth market car. 22,000 orders in a day taught the industry that the baby boomers were not a trend. They were the market. One borrowed Falcon platform, one impossible launch, one factory pushed past every limit it was built for, and one car every 50 seconds until America finally had enough. But here is the thing. 1964 was Ford at its absolute peak of confidence. Just 6 years earlier, the same company had launched another car with the biggest marketing campaign in its history. 10 years of research, $250 million. And America did not line up to buy it. America laughed at it. The name was Edsel, and the story of how Ford built the most famous flop of all time is next.